Hi, I'm Mimi Geerges. In the run-up to the war with Iraq, Colin Powell famously told President Bush, "If you break it, you own it." Well, it's still broken. Iraqi analyst and blogger Nibras Kazimi joins me.
Perceptions have solidified of an America walking away from the Middle East. These perceptions are going to be acted upon. To reverse that, you have to go in big and bold. I don't think either candidate Clinton or candidate Trump
is willing to do that.
Yes.
So what's better for Iraq, a President Trump or a President Clinton?
I've heard there's a third candidate.
Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. Remember when The Daily Show's Jon Stewart used to call Iraq Mesopotamia? Well, it's still a mess. Since the invasion, the U.S. has lost nearly 8,000 service members and contractors in Iraq, and we've spent billions of dollars. But the Islamic State occupies the second largest city, Mosul. There's a lack of basic services like water and electricity. There's corruption and terror attacks in Baghdad. Nibras Kazimi is an Iraqi analyst and blogger. We'll talk about the current state of Iraqi security, politics, and the prospects for stability. Nibras, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You were in Iraq recently. Tell us, what did you see there? What's the situation?
Well, you have the makings of a perfect storm. You have three crises. One is security, one is financial, and the third is political. Security, the challenge posed by ISIS, or the Islamic State, and you also have the way the battle against the Islamic State has been conducted, which involves a component called the PMF, the Popular Mobilization Units, otherwise called Shia militias. So that's an added security issue built into the solution to the problem.
Because they're going after Sunnis and all kinds of human rights abuses against the Sunni population.
There are human rights abuses, and these abuses complicate an already complicated situation. They add toxicity to the atmosphere of trying to resolve the challenge posed by ISIS, which is to defeat ISIS without it feeling to the Sunnis as if they are being defeated. So that's a big challenge ahead. Then you have the financial crisis, which is the drop in the price of oil, and the Iraqi budget, or the Iraqi spending, especially its wage bill, the salaries and pensions that it pays out, that's tailored to about $100 per barrel. And now we're talking about, even on a good day, $50 a barrel. So that's half of Iraq's income gone, where the spending has not been addressed. And the third element is, because of these two situations, and also harking to earlier problems, you have a political crisis that has manifested itself with demonstrations,
storming of the Green Zone.
Storming of the Green Zone, Muqtada al-Sadr and the Sadrists carrying the banner of these demonstrations forward. And again, it complicates everything. People want to talk about a cabinet reshuffle. People want to talk about changing the prime minister, a lot of second guessing. And to complicate even further is a regional situation that is problematic, and what seems like American disinterest in doing much about it.
So, you know, it was back in 2006 that Joe Biden, when he was still a senator, said that Iraq should be divided, like the Balkan states. So you have your Shia area, your Sunni area, your Kurdish area. Baghdad is kind of a central government area. Now that's starting to look like a good idea. I mean, what do you think of that?
I didn't think it was a good idea back in 2006 when then Senator Biden proposed it. And even without being sentimental about it, as an Iraqi, you have to be sentimental about the breakup of your country, or the possibility of that. But even if you take it very coldly and analytically, you can define a lot of angles where this will just lead to more problems. For example, right now you have a lot of voices in Washington, sober, rational voices saying, all right, maybe the silver lining here, what we can walk away with, is an independent Kurdistan, so a section for the Kurds, which might get joined with a similar situation unfolding in northern Syria, where the Kurds also live there. They're fighting ISIS. It's a good story. Their economy is sustainable. And the previous regional rejection of the idea of an independent Kurdistan, especially from a country like Turkey, that has been watered down over, let's say, the decade since Senator Biden made that
Suggestion.
suggestion. But then again, if the Kurds say this is only one scenario that might unfold, that I don't think is a good scenario. If the Kurds say, that's it, we're walking away and we're going to have a referendum on independence as they're advocating for right now, or some of the political parties there are advocating for right now, then the Shiites are going to say, all right, that's great. We don't have to carry the Sunnis on our backs anymore. Let's also draw a line in the sand. All the oil is in our territory. Why should we share it with somebody else? Especially people who, in the popular imagination, or how some politicians sell it, Sunnis don't want to live with Shia. And there has been a Shia reaction to that. They also don't want to live with the Sunnis. So again, let's dissociate. Then you have a Sunni area left on its own, devastated by ISIS, by the Islamic State, devastated by war, and economically poor. Who's going to carry that? That, to me, seems like a recipe for keeping ISIS in the picture.
Yeah. Do you think Iraq can ever be the democracy that we had hoped for back in 2003?
There's something very important. So I'm talking about a perfect storm, and to a lot of people, this perfect storm has been raging for a very long time, for at least a decade, hence people suggesting that it should break up 10 years ago, because it was also already, it looked bad 10 years ago. But at the same time, you can also say that it's incredible how much Iraq has weathered this storm, how resilient it's been in some angles. And I would invite people to reconsider the lessons learned from Iraq. So we have the Obama administration in articulating its Obama doctrine. For example, in the April issue of The Atlantic, the president, in his long series of interviews with Jeffrey Goldberg, is giving us the message that what he's been doing is disengagement from the Middle East. And why is he doing that? Lessons learned from Iraq. There's one issue there. I'm not suggesting that it's wrong. I'm just saying that the lessons learned from that debate occurred in an atmosphere where the conversation about Iraq was very shrill and very partisan and very angry, and lots of recrimination. There was agenda suggested, malice inferred from all sides onto all sides. It was a very ugly atmosphere, which continues to some extent when you bring up Iraq. People throwing up their hands and saying, Mesopotamia, Bush's fault. So drawing lesson from that atmosphere of a conversation might not be the best lessons to be drawn. Maybe there's a revisiting has to happen of those lessons learned from Iraq, because even after all that's happened, Iraq is still there. People still show up to work in Baghdad. Children still go to school. Ice cream is still being sold. Life does go on even with the horrific bombings that happen. People pick themselves up and go on living. So there's something there that has to be looked at again. Why is it continuing? Why has it proven so resilient? And I would maintain is that Iraq is the only place in the whole region, and I'd include Israel in this category, where an actual conversation about the very hard issues of what to do with this future, including opening up the conversation to whether it should break up or not, that conversation is occurring in Iraq, hardly happening in other places that also need this conversation, places like Syria, Turkey, Iran, Egypt, or even the Gulf, the Persian Gulf.
I wonder who the Iraqi people blame for their current misfortune. Is it ISIS? Is it the United States? Is it their own political leadership?
Of course, it's going to be all of the above right here, because the results have not been very inspiring. And then you have different gradations of gripe. I think right now the Americans are not visibly there since 2011, so people would blame their politicians first and foremost for what is happening, including allowing the comeback of the Islamic State. Because in 2006, when again we go back to Senator Biden, the Islamic State declared itself in October 2006, so 5 months after Biden made his suggestion. So the Islamic State also has been around for 10 years, and they did make a comeback after they had been defeated in 2010, and that's why the U.S. felt comfortable enough to leave. But then there was a comeback, and in assigning blame for that comeback, I think a lot of regular Iraqis would point the finger towards their politicians.
There was some political turmoil recently in Baghdad. Protesters, these are all Shias, stormed the Green Zone. They took down some walls. They occupied parliament for a short time. What's happening?
Let's qualify the Shia. The big numbers on the street were the followers of Muqtada al-Sadr. So that's one strain of the Shia political spectrum. Muqtada al-Sadr, if we judge his support base by previous elections, and Iraq has had multiple elections, the last time he did very well with 40 members of parliament out of 328. So that's about nearing 15% of the electorate was voting for his guys. That's not bad. And the numbers that he brought out to the street were mostly his numbers. But it's very interesting what he tried to do. He tried to make it seem as if it's not just only his people. So he allied with liberal Democrats, seculars, also who had been protesting months ahead before he decided to take on this mantle. He allied with them. He had them as part of the steering committees. He mentions them from time to time in his speeches as our allies. So it's also very important for him to seem as if this is not dogmatic and this has a bigger base by allying with these seculars. And this is also part of a conversation that's going on in Iraq as to where's the country heading and what form of resolution to all these political, economic, security problems is available, and can Iraq arrive at such an answer?
Most of those protesters were talking about the lack of basic services, the electricity, the water, that kind of thing. But there's still a lot of corruption going on in Iraq. Transparency International has a corruption index, and out of 167 countries, Iraq came in 161. That's really bad.
Yeah, that's pretty bad. And I don't know who's above and below Iraq, but I would seriously doubt that the numbers, the scale of the corruption, just as a dollar value, nears anything that Iraq has experienced over the last 10 years, because we are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars that seem as if they've been frittered away or are missing. And this is an incredible topic.
So you can never really fix the economy if you've got that much money being stolen.
Well, I mean, it was being stolen because it was available. Right now, very little of that money is available. And people were not complaining because, for example, the pension plan in Iraq is one of the most generous pension plans in the world. Or so we hear from the IMF and the World Bank. They're complaining about it, actually, to the Iraqi government. So a lot of the Iraqi population were getting salaries and pensions, and they were happy with their lot, and they just sit back and forget about those other hundreds of billions that are gone missing. Just kind of political trade-off ahead of elections. You hire more people through patronage and that kind of thing and spread out more of the money. But now, with less money coming in, and the suggestion being made that, okay, actually we might have to cut some pensions and some salaries, that's where people start remembering those hundreds of millions. However, the important thing to note is that I don't know if the economy can be fixed, but popular anger on the issue of corruption is likely going to manifest itself through elections, and that has grabbed the attention of the political parties that need to answer for the money that they frittered away.
How do you rate Prime Minister al-Abadi?
I would rate him medium, just to be nice.
Oh,
medium
that's not
competence.
I mean, for Iraq, it's not too bad.
But better can be done. I think it should be open because there's a conversation and there's political life. So if it comes to that, the political actors and the political class needs to pick another prime minister who is better suited to deal with these challenges that Iraq is facing, then that should be allowed to happen. Actually here, one country that is still influential in Iraq that has thrown its weight behind Abadi and hence sort of choked off the conversation about replacing him has been the United States.
Why? Why would we be invested in having him stay?
He's good enough, probably, maybe for the administration. He's capable enough to handle this. He says the right things. He might not follow up with much action, but they fear the unknown. They fear that if you replace him, it will take a long time to get to a resolution about who gets to replace him. And I think generally the US administration is uncomfortable with parliamentary systems where it is not a one-off where you pick the top executive. No, you have to allow Parliament to do all its machinations because Parliament picks the Prime Minister, not the general vote.
Let's talk about the Islamic State. They're in Iraq, obviously. What do they want there? What are their priorities in Iraq?
Well, they tell us what their priorities are. They've told us actually over the 10-year span period since they declared or proclaimed themselves as the Islamic State of Iraq in 2006. And they say that they want to bring back the rule of law, the rule of God's law. They say things like the Prophet Muhammad, when he announced the faith, he didn't promise people prosperity and welfare. So don't expect us to turn this place into a utopia. If we can, we try to do the best we can at governance, but really we're here to bring back the manifestation of God's law, and that includes fighting who they believe to be the people who are either the clear-cut enemy of the faith, such as the West, or the internal enemies within Islam who undermine the faith, like the Shia. So it is a blueprint for the future. They feel that they are fulfilling the tenets of their faith, that the faith compels them to do what they're doing. And at the same time, they feel they have to cleanse the terrain and push back against the enemies, external and internal, in order to have that's how they flourish. That's how they think.
How likely do you think it is that they'll be expelled from Fallujah and Mosul?
I would say likely for two reasons. You didn't ask about the timeline, though.
Oh.
All right. But right now they're under a lot of pressure in Fallujah. They are putting up a fight, which is different from a lot of the other cities they've lost, where they didn't even try to put up a fight. They just withdrew, melted away into the desert, and that brings up the issue of their tactics. What do they have in mind long term? But in Fallujah, they were encircled, and even if they wanted to melt away into the desert, it becomes a lot more difficult for them to leave that clasp that they're in. And they're fighting, and they're matched with overwhelming numbers. So I think we're talking about a ratio of 1 to 30 in the context of the Fallujah battle right now. And it hasn't been that easy. Some areas, especially rural areas around Fallujah, they've given up easily, but they've drawn themselves into the city, and it seems at least part of their thinking is that they're going to leave the city in ruins, and they're going to hope for human rights abuses from groups such as these Shia militias against Sunnis in order to further the impression that nobody's coming to liberate you. These are people who are coming to basically put a boot on your necks, and the only capable force of pushing back against the Shia is the Islamic State. That's part of the messaging. And it's been interesting that much of the Arab media has, for example, like a Jazeera or let's say Saudi-funded channels. So they are against the Islamic State, but they have framed the Battle of Fallujah as a sectarian battle between Shia and Sunni, hence going back to the issue of making the optics of it looking like a Shia victory over Sunnis rather than the liberation of Sunnis from the Islamic State.
But what do we know about the Sunnis living in Fallujah? Do they want to be liberated?
That's very difficult to gauge. I think the fact that the majority of the people of Fallujah left Fallujah when the Islamic State first rolled in. And by the way, the Islamic State took Fallujah in January 2014, so 6 months before Mosul, 6 months before the world became serious about the Islamic State and the threat they posed. Now, there is some evidence that the US did send in some military advisors even at that point, but it was very small, a drop in the bucket. They didn't take it very seriously, and it manifested itself later in places like Mosul on a much more massive scale. But going back to the question of what do the people of Fallujah want, I think the first calculation would be is that even if we want to see the Islamic State in a positive light, having them around is the cost of that is prohibitive, because that's bombs, that's artillery, it's tanks, and that is also in some sectors and areas the Shia militias being unleashed on us. Now there's also a very important point here, is that not all the Shia militias have been accused. They're not a uniform block, maybe something like 70 of them, and maybe 10 of them are actually very important or sizable forces.
And there's also Iran, though.
There's also Iran. So within the 10, you have maybe 5 or 6 that seem beholden to Iran. You have one in the middle, and then you have some that are not seen as that hostile or that dangerous or aggressive towards Sunnis. For example, if we take the case of the Sadr's militia, previously in 2006, 2007, the Mahdi Army, which rebranded itself as an organization now called Sarai al-Salam. 10 years ago, the Mahdi Army was seen as the most horrific abuser of Sunnis, as the people taking revenge from what the Sunnis or some Sunnis were doing in bombing markets where a lot of Shia were dying, or bombing the shrines, the important Shia shrines. But now, Sarai al-Salam, the rebranded Sadr's militia, is considered the most Sunni friendly of these militias. And actually, you see a lot of Sunni tribes suggesting that if it had to come to that, if you are going to send in these kinds of auxiliaries to the Iraqi army, we'd rather them be from this and that organization, such as Sarai al-Salam.
Do you want to see the U.S. more militarily involved to fight ISIS?
I would, but I'm also realistic. This is not going to happen. I think what we've been getting.
But you think it would be helpful, even though politically it's not going to happen?
Well, this is how I look at it. I mean, when the Islamic State takes Mosul, so 2 years ago, and even before that, we had 6 months of being on notice that they're in Fallujah, they've taken Fallujah. Now, when they take a city like Mosul, with all those resources, with that kind of population, with the symbolism there, all right, and you have 2 courses of action. One is go big and eject them, so something like Saddam taking Kuwait, eject Saddam out of Kuwait. Or you do the incremental thing, the slow pacing, as the administration has done. I understand that there wasn't the appetite to do option A, but there are long-term consequences for not doing option A, because you have 2 years of a normalized situation where one of the most horrific modern-day organizations in terms of terror, in terms of violence, in terms of repression, takes over a major metropolis in the Middle East, and they have 2 years of raising a generation there. Tens of thousands of young kids going through their schooling system, being indoctrinated. What is that going to mean? What are the long-term consequences of that?
Is there anything that President Obama can do in the short time he's got left to make Iraq better? Even a little bit?
They've been doing what they're doing because they believe there are lessons learned from Iraq. And the lessons learned from Iraq is to do just the bare minimum, I think, without getting embroiled or caught up in the quagmire. And again, this goes back to how the debate about Iraq was framed over the last 13 years.
So any one thing in particular that he can do that if you were advising him, you'd say, President Obama, you need to do this?
I'd say, given that you're temperamentally and it seems ideologically unwilling to get embroiled in Iraq, then what he's done is all right. We'll take that for now.
So what's better for Iraq, a President Trump or a President Clinton?
I've heard there's a third candidate somewhere.
You wish.
Yeah. Candidate Trump has been very clear about also learning his own lessons from Iraq. That's a bad idea to get involved in the first place. And he does seem as if he might continue a lot of what Obama has started, which is just to wash one's hands or America's hands of the region. He says he's going to be tougher on the Islamic State. I don't know if he can muster the appetite throughout the country to do more, and what would more entail and constitute. Candidate Clinton has told us that she wasn't very happy about how the administration had executed its policy, or the incrementalism or minimalism of the administration, especially in places like Syria. She voiced her concern at the time and after she left her job as Secretary of State. So she might have something to prove by going back in and taking a more activist policy. But there's an important thing: this sort of distancing between the United States and the Middle East in general, not just Iraq. A lot of that seems to me that ground ceded, a lot of that is irreversible because perceptions have solidified of an America walking away from the Middle East, and these perceptions are going to be acted upon. And to reverse that, you have to go in big and bold. I don't think either candidate Clinton or candidate Trump
is willing to do that.
Yes.
Nibras, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. You can see all of our programs on YouTube. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter and leave me your comments there. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.